Okay, I guess so. I guess it's my go, since the second presenter is missing. So my name is Cody Havard, and for the last 10 years plus, I have been researching rivalry and group behavior, and basically the understanding of why someone will treat someone different based on the group they identify with. So in this particular study, we're looking at comparing how people feel toward their outgroup in the sports setting and how people feel toward their outgroup in the popular athletics footwear setting. And so to kind of get into a little bit more of this, we'll get into when we talk about social identity. Social identity influences things like the way we see ourselves, and the way we see others. So it will impact the groups that we belong to, but also the way that we view outgroups and behaviors toward those in groups and out groups. So for instance, if someone in our group does something that is positive, we stereotype that to the rest of the in group. If someone in our group does something that's negative, then we distance the rest of the group from that negative behavior. We do the opposite for someone in an out group. If someone does something negative, we tend to stereotype that to the out group, all in a way to make us feel that we are superior to a said out group, whatever out group that might be. Now, when rivalry and competition are factored in as well, then it as I've mentioned, it can impact the way that we perceive and behave toward members of an out group, but it's also can impact our situational assessment. So depending on what situations we're in, we may view in-group members and out-group members differently. As I just said, with if an in-group member does something negative versus if an out-group member does something negative. And when I originally started researching rivalry, it was a lot to do with the marketing and promotional aspects of rivalry within the sport context. And it wasn't long before I realized that there are a lot of things that we as organizers and as researchers and academics need to do to better understand how the way rivalries and competitions are promoted can influence negative and positive behavior. So that's what has set us on this path here. So here's just a kind of a broad definition of rivalry. It forms when competitors evaluate each other to a certain level of importance, and they treat each other as a threat. And it's usually vicariously through someone else, like in the sport context, or if you're talking about the political context, a said political candidate, whatever brands you are identifying with. And then some of the positive things from a promotional aspect is rivalry can increase consumption, but also it can increase the willingness of someone to celebrate the failure of an outgroup and to derogate that outgroup, which can then lead to this win at all costs mentality of people choosing to be unethical, make unethical decisions to best a rival or a competitor. And then it can also, unfortunately, lead to the likelihood or increase the likelihood someone will commit anonymous aggression toward others that are in an out group. And so far, we have conducted 10 different comparisons in 11 different settings. So here are the settings that we have compared outgroup behavior to. So obviously we started in sport, and then we've compared sport to the rest of these settings in previous studies. So sport and politics, sport and online gaming, or people who use a PC or like a console like Xbox or PlayStation to compete in online gaming or esports. We've also done it with streaming services, with gaming consoles specific to people who use Xbox or PlayStation, people who are fans or users of Apple or Samsung mobile phones, people who are fans of Star Trek or Star Wars science fiction, people are a fan of Marvel and DC, and then in theme parks, and then also specific to Disney and Universal theme parks. So what we're doing here in this study is we are looking at how people perceive the out group in sport and athletic footwear, and then some of their likely behaviors. So here are the hypotheses that significant differences will be present in the way people perceive and their likely behaviors toward a relevant out group. So sport fans will be different from athletic footwear fandom, and hypothesis 1, but also hypothesis 2 and hypothesis 3 test the in-group, the common in-group hypothesis, which basically states that if you are a member of more than one group, then you tend to be less negative toward a relevant out group than if you're a member of only one group. So in this instance, if someone is a fan of sport and athletic footwear, then will they report different perceptions of their out group than someone who's just a fan of sport? And someone who's a fan of just athletic footwear, will they report different perceptions of the out group than someone who's a fan of sport and athletic footwear? And the theory behind that is that if we are members of multiple groups, if one of our groups or one of our interests experiences some type of failure, perceived failure, then we have another group that we can kind of focus on, and we can get those positive attributes of that group. Whereas if we are totally invested in one group and that group experiences some kind of perceived failure, then that comes on us full fold. We don't have anything to take our focus off of that, and then that can lead to us being more negative toward other people. So in this comparison, here here's the sample of 94, 59.6% male, 40.4% female, and you can see the age range as well. So regarding fandom, what we did is in order to test hypothesis 1, we have to ask people if they are a fan of athletic footwear or sport. And then in order to test hypothesis 2 and 3, we ask if someone's a fan of both. So basically the first question in the survey is, are you a fan of a sport team, athletic footwear, or both a sport team and athletic footwear? And you can see right here, 21.3% said footwear only, 28.7% said sport only, and then 50% said both. And this is a little different from previous comparisons that we've done, but it also makes sense because athletic footwear is tied so closely with sport teams that people follow. So that ultimately makes sense. And then when we look at the favorite brands, Adidas and Nike were the two favorite brands. And then when we look at the rival brands, Adidas, Nike, Puma, Fila, Reebok, and Asics were all listed for rival brands. We measured identification, so how identified someone is with a favorite brand, using a revised version of the SSIS, the Sport Spectator Identification Scale. We measured attitude toward brands using a 5-item semantic differential measure, and we did that toward favorite brands in sport and athletic footwear. And then we also did the attitude toward brand for the rival team, or the rival brand as well, sorry. We used the Rivalry perception scale. So this is a scale that measures 4 different aspects of how a person can view an outgroup, such as direct competition, indirect competition, the prestige of the rival brand, and behavior of rival brand supporters. Glory out of reflective failure, or gorfing, here is the willingness for someone to celebrate when the rival brand experiences some type of failure that is indirect, so it doesn't have anything to do with the favorite brand. So in sport, that would be if your rival team loses to a team other than your favorite team. In athletic footwear, that might be if you're a fan of Nike and Adidas receives negative reviews for a shoe that they just put out, or there's some type of controversy based on someone who is an athlete or that sponsors that brand or wears that brand. And then the group behavior composite brings together the 4 subscales of the Rivalry perception scale and the glory out of reflective failure to create a composite score, which is an overall measure of negativity toward an outgroup, and that will come in important at the end here. And so when we looked at hypothesis one, the significant differences, sport was more negative in all of these instances, except for identification. So there was a significant difference in identification. Sport fans were more identified with their sport brand than were footwear fans. Sport fans were also more negative toward the attitude of the rival brand. They were more negative regarding rival team supporters. They experienced more sense of satisfaction when their rival team directly compared favorably to the rival team than did athletic footwear supporters. And then their group behavior composite was also higher, which, as I said, is that overall measure of negativity toward an outgroup. And then with hypothesis two, there were no significant differences. And then hypothesis three, the significant differences were if you were a fan of sport only, then you reported more positive attitudes toward your favorite brand than if you were a fan of sport and athletic footwear. And then there were no significant differences when we tested between fans of Nike versus fans of Adidas. So getting to what all of this means and what we've been doing over the last 4 to 5 years now is looking at these different comparisons and how can we use these in a way to help understand, help future researchers understand, but also help future practitioners deal with and work with people in these group settings. And so here's the hierarchy of outgroup derogation. And when I presented over the summer about this, I presented this as well. We just keep updating this. And as we do more and more comparisons, we will continue this. So out of the 11 situations so far, what we found is the 3 most negative situations are online gaming. So those people who use PCs versus people who use consoles, the way they view each other. Then second is politics. So the way Republicans view Democrats and Democrats view Republicans, sport teams, fans. And then in the medium to highly negative group is the athletic footwear, which is the focus of this study here. And then mobile phones, so way Samsung users view iPhone users and vice versa. And the medium negative is streaming fans. So the way people from popular streaming services view their rival streaming brands that they consider their rivals, and then theme parks in general. And then the 4 that are the low negativity. So these, and we'll see on the spectrum here in just a little bit, gaming consoles, Disney parks, science fiction, and comics. And so here is that outgroup derogation spectrum. And so what we're looking at is the spectrum ranges from 1 being least negative to 7 being most negative. I've zoomed in on 3.5 to 5 because that's where all of our group comparisons fall in the studies that we've done. So what you can see is over on the far right toward more negative is the online electronic gaming with a mean of 4.78. And then next is politics at 4.75. And then it's actually a good bit lower, but still on the negative range, that we have sport with a mean of 4.49. And obviously, because sport is included in all of these comparisons, there are more data points for sport. So you're gonna, there's not a lot of fluctuation with sport as there might be with another setting where you measure one time. But I included that in the negative, the highly negative section, because it's still a good bit higher than everything else. There's still a lot of separation between sport and everything else. So as you could see, athletic footwear, mobile phones, theme parks, and streaming are actually a mean of 4.10. So they're the exact same, with a little bit of difference in their standard deviation. Online console gaming. So again, that's people who use people who use Xbox versus PlayStation, is a 4.01. Disney parks fandom is a 4.01. So it's basically, it's right there on the neutral. So you can't really say like Disney parks and online console gaming. Those aren't really, it's difficult to say those are really even negative perceptions of the out group. And then in the more positive perceptions of the out group, you have science fiction fans and comics fans, which one thing that I think is always interesting about science fiction fans and comics fans is the stories that they consume are all about conflict, or most of them are about conflict. So you have people who are reading about conflict on a regular basis, but they are actually the more positive, or report the more positive perceptions of their out group. And I think a lot of that deals with the fact that if you're a science fiction fan or a comics fan, you have your favorite brands, but you're also members of comic fandom or science fiction fandom. And so you share this larger in group with anybody who is a fan of those, regardless if they're a fan of Marvel or DC or Star Wars or Star Trek. And so what is all this for? Well, we want to be able to, we created the hierarchy and the spectrum so that we can help teach people more about group behavior, and also helping practitioners to look for commonalities. I mentioned earlier the common in group. If we can start to test and work with people who are in different groups and find different commonalities, then maybe that's something that will help. So I'll go back 2 slides just to show. So here with the hierarchy, let's say we have somebody who is they consider themselves a hardcore Democrat or a hardcore, and one person's a hardcore Democrat, one person's a hardcore Republican. Well, you can see politics is number 2 on this list. So that may be a situation where whenever they try to talk about that, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of like competition and animosity between the two. But let's also say, let's look for another commonality on this list. Let's say maybe they're both fans of Disney parks. Well, that's very low on the list. As I said, you can't even say that's negative perception of the outgroup. So maybe there is a situation where they can relate to somebody else about their fandom of the Disney parks. And then as the common in group hypothesis states, the more that you interact with someone, the more willing you are to try to understand somebody else and understand maybe their perceptions on different things. So this isn't saying that people just shouldn't talk about topics that are uncomfortable, or maybe topics that they may disagree on. It's more looking at how do we try and teach people to behave toward each other in a more positive, less animus way. And one way of doing that is trying to look for these commonalities where they have common interest. And if you focus on those common interests and you focus on those first, then it could help to start conversations about things that maybe people disagree on. And so that's it for me. If anybody has any questions, I'll stop sharing as well. Thank you everybody for allowing me to do this.